So should we get on with it? Yeah, I think we should. I think we should. Here we go. The Monster Men by Edgar Rice Burroughs. VJ's here. Good morning. Good morning there, VJ. We're just about to jump into our brand new novel. Just starting it today. How are you doing? Hope your weekend is well. Hope the weekend has been awesome. The upcoming week going to be fantastic. That's what we are reading, The Monster Men. Without further ado, let's do it. Let us do it. The Monster Men by Edgar Rice Burroughs. Okay, I've never read this before, by the way. Actually, like most of the stuff here, it's all cold reading. So, the Rift, the Heavy Chest, Beauty and the Beast, a New Face, Treason, To Kill, the Bullwhip. Okay, all right. The Rift. As he dropped the last grisly fragment of the dismembered and mutilated body into the small vat of nitric acid that was to devour every trace of the horrid evidence which might easily send him to the gallows, the man sank weakly into a chair, and throwing his body forward upon his great teak desk, buried his face in his arms, breaking into dry, moaning sobs. Now that's how you start a novel. Dismembered a mutilated body into a large vat of nitric acid to hide the evidence that's going to send you to the hangman's noose. Alrighty, yeah, okay, good. Beads of perspiration followed the seams of his high, wrinkled forehead, replacing the tears which might have lessened the pressure upon his overwrought nerves. His slender frame shook as with ague, and at times was racked by a convulsive shudder. A sudden step upon the stairway leading to his workshop brought him trembling and wide-eyed to his feet, staring fearfully at the locked and bolted door. Although he knew perfectly well whose the advancing footfalls were, he was all but overcome by the madness of apprehension as they came softly nearer and nearer to the barred door. At last they halted before it, to be followed by a gentle knock. "Daddy," came the sweet tones of a girl's voice. The man made an effort to take a firm grasp upon himself, that no telltale evidence of his emotion might be betrayed in his speech. "Daddy," called the girl again, a trace of anxiety in her voice this time. "What is the matter with you, and what are you doing? You've been shut up in that hateful old room for 3 days now without a morsel to eat, and in all likelihood without a wink of sleep. You'll kill yourself with your stuffy old experiments." The man's face softened. "Don't worry about me, sweetheart," he replied in a well-controlled voice. "I'll soon be through now. I'll soon be through, and then we'll go away for a long vacation. "I'll give you until noon, Daddy," said the girl, in a voice which carried a more strongly defined tone of authority than her father's soft drawl. "And then I shall come into that room if I have to use an axe and bring you out. Do you understand?" Professor Maxon smiled wanly. He knew that his daughter was equal to her threat. "All right, sweetheart. I'll be through by noon for sure. By noon for sure. Run along and play now, like a good little girl." Virginia Maxon shrugged her shapely shoulders and shook her head hopelessly at the forbidding panels of the door. "My dolls are all dressed for the day," she cried, "and I'm tired of making mud pies. I want you to come out and play with me." But Professor Maxon did not reply. He had returned to view his grim operations, and the hideousness of them had closed his ears to the sweet tones of the girl's voice. As she turned to retrace her steps to the floor below, Miss Maxon still shook her head. "Poor old Daddy," she mused. "Were I 1,000 years old, wrinkled and toothless, he would still look upon me as his baby girl." If you chance to be an alumnus of Cornell, You may recall Professor Arthur Maxon, a quiet, slender, white-haired gentleman who for several years was an assistant professor in one of the departments of natural science. Excuse me. Wealthy by inheritance, he had chosen the field of education for his life work solely from a desire to be of some material benefit to mankind, since the meager salary which accompanied his professorship was not of sufficient import to influence him in the slightest degree. Always keenly interested in biology, his almost unlimited means had permitted him to undertake, in secret, a series of daring experiments which had carried him so far in advance of the biologists of his day that he had, while others were still groping blindly for the secret of life, actually reproduced by chemical means the great phenomenon. Fully alive to the gravity and responsibilities of his marvelous discovery, he had kept the results of his experimentation, and even the experiments themselves, a profound secret, not only from his colleagues, but from his only daughter, who heretofore had shared his every hope and aspiration. It was the very success of his last and most pretentious effort that had placed him in the horrifying predicament in which he now found himself, with the corpse of what was apparently a human being in his workshop, and no available explanation that could possibly be acceptable to a matter-of-fact and unscientific police. Had he told them the truth, they would have laughed at him. Had he said, "This is not a human being that you see, but the remains of a chemically produced counterfeit created in my own laboratory," they would have smiled and either hanged him or put him away with other criminally insane. This phase of the many possibilities which he had realized might be contingent upon even the partial success of his work. What? This phase of the many possibilities which he had realized might be contingent upon even the partial success of his work alone. Had it escaped? That might... Okay, this boy, oh boy, we could have used some commas in here. This phase of the many possibilities which he had realized might be contingent upon even the partial success of his work alone, had escaped his consideration, so that the first wave of triumphant exultation with which he had viewed the finished result of this last experiment had been succeeded by overwhelming consternation as he saw the thing which he had created gasp once or twice with the feeble spark of life with which he had endowed it, and expire, leaving upon his hands the corpse of what was, to all intent and purpose, a human being, albeit a most grotesque and misshapen thing. Until nearly noon, Professor Maxon was occupied in removing the remaining stains and evidences of his gruesome work. But when he at last turned the key in the door of his workshop, it was to leave behind no single trace of the successful result of his years of labor. The following afternoon found him and Virginia crossing the station platform to board the express for New York. So quietly had their plans been made that not a friend was at the train to bid them farewell. The scientist felt that he could not bear the strain of attempting explanations at this time. But there were those who recognized them, and one especially who noted the lithe, trim figure and beautiful face of Virginia Maxon, though he did not know even the name of their professor. It was a tall, well-built young man who nudged one of his younger companions as the girl crossed the platform to enter her Pullman. "I say, Dexter," he exclaimed, "who is that beauty?" The one addressed turned in the direction indicated by his friend. "Oh, by Jove!" he exclaimed. "Why, it's Virginia Maxon and the professor, her father. Now where do you suppose they're going?" "Oh, I don't know, now," replied the first speaker, Townsend J. Harper, Jr., in a half-whisper, "but I'll bet you a new car that I find out." A week later, with failing health and shattered nerves, Professor Maxon sailed with his daughter for a long ocean voyage, which he hoped would aid him in rapid recuperation and permit him to forget the nightmare memory of those 3 horrible days and nights in his workshop. He believed that he had reached an unalterable decision never again to meddle with the mighty or inspiring secrets of creation. But with returning health and balance, he found himself viewing his recent triumph with feelings of renewed hope and anticipation. The morbid fears superinduced by the shock following the sudden demise of the first creature of his experiments had given place to a growing desire to further prosecute his labors until enduring success had crowned his efforts with an achievement which he might exhibit with pride to the scientific world. His recent disastrous success had convinced him that neither Ithaca nor any other abode of civilization was a safe place to continue his experiments, but it was not until their cruising had brought them across the multitudinous islands of the East Indies that the plan occurred to him that he finally adopted. A plan, the outcome of which, could he then have foreseen, would have sent him scurrying to the safety of his own country with the daughter who was to bear the full brunt of the horrors it entailed. Now that's some foreshadowing. They were steaming up the China Sea when the idea first suggested itself, and as he sat idly during the long hot days, the thought grew upon him, expanding into 1,000 wonderful possibilities, until it became crystallized into what was a little short of an obsession. The result was that, at Manila, much to Virginia's surprise, he announced the abandonment of the balance of their purposed voyage, taking immediate return passage to Singapore. His daughter did not question him as to the cause of this change in plans, for since those 3 days that her father had kept himself locked in his workroom at home, the girl had noticed a subtle change in her parent, a marked disinclination to share with her his every confidence, as had been his custom since the death of her mother. While it grieved her immeasurably, she was both too proud and too hurt to sue for a re-establishment of the old relations. On all other topics than his scientific work, their interests were as mutual as formerly, but by what seemed a manner of tacit agreement, this subject was taboo. "Good morning, Anya." "Good morning. So good to see you." And so it was they came to Singapore without the girl having the slightest conception of her father's plans. All righty. Just a quick little recap. Edgar Rice Burroughs doesn't waste any time jumping into stuff. The father is a mad scientist. And it literally started up with him chopping up and throwing into a vat of acid the remains of the animated human clone, basically, which he had brought to life and which then died, getting rid of the good Lord, the monster men. Here's a wiki if anyone needs the info about the book. Yeah, all righty. Let's, okay. Blah, blah, blah. And so it was that they came to Singapore without the girl having the slightest conception of her father's plans. Here they spent nearly a month, during which time Professor Maxon was daily engaged in interviewing officials, English residents, and a motley horde of Malays and Chinamen. Virginia met socially several of the men with whom her father was engaged, but it was only at the last moment that one of them let drop a hint of the purpose of the month's activity. When Virginia was present, the conversation seemed always deftly guided from the subject of her father's immediate future, and she was not long in discerning that it was in no sense through accident that this was true. Thereafter, her wounded pride made easy the task of those who seemed combined to keep her in ignorance. It was a Dr. von Horn, who had been oftenest with her father, who gave her the first intimation of what was forthcoming. Afterward, in recollecting the conversation, it seemed to Virginia that the young man had been directed to break the news to her, that her father might be spared the ordeal. It was evident, then, that he expected opposition, but the girl was too loyal to let von Horn know if she felt other than in harmony with the proposal, and too proud to evince by surprise the fact that she was not wholly conversant with its every detail. "You're glad to be leaving Singapore so soon?" he had asked, although he knew that she had not been advised that an early departure was planned. "I'm rather looking forward to it," replied Virginia. "And to a protracted residence on one of the Paramount Islands?" continued von Horn. "Oh, why not?" was her rather non-committal reply, though she had not the remotest idea of their location. Von Horn admired her nerve, though he rather wished that she would ask some questions. It was difficult making progress in this way. How could he explain the plans when she evinced not the slightest sign that she was not already entirely conversant with them? "We doubt if the work will be completed under 2 or 3 years," answered the doctor. "That will be a long time in which to be isolated upon a savage little speck of land off the larger but no less savage Borneo. Do you think that your bravery is equal to the demands that will be made upon it?" Virginia laughed, nor was there the slightest tremor in its note. "I am equal to whatever fate my father is equal to," she said. "Nor do I think that a life upon one of these beautiful little islands would be much of a hardship, certainly not if it will help to promote the success of his scientific experiments." She used the last words on a chance that she might have hit upon the true reason for the contemplated isolation from civilization. They had served their purpose, too, in deceiving von Horn, who was now half convinced that Professor Maxon must have divulged more of their plans to his daughter than he had led the medical man to believe. Perceiving her Perceiving her advantage from the expression on the young man's face, it's a young doctor, all right, Virginia followed it up in an endeavor to elicit the details. The result of her effort was the knowledge that on the second day they were to sail for the Paramount Islands upon a small schooner which her father had purchased, with a crew of Malays and Lascars. What's Lascar? A sailor from India or Southeast Asia. Okay. Upon a small schooner which her father had purchased, with a crew of Malays and Lascars, and von Horn, who had served in the American Navy, in command. The precise point of the destination was still undecided, the plan being to search out a suitable location upon one of the many little islets which dot the western shore of the Macassar Strait. Of the many men Virginia had met during the month at Singapore, von Horn had been by far the most interesting and companionable. Such time as he could find away from the many duties which had devolved upon him in the matter of obtaining and outfitting the schooner, and signing her 2 mates and crew of 15, had been spent with his employer's daughter. The girl was rather glad that he was to be a member of their little company, for she had found him a much-travelled man and an interesting talker, with none of the, to her, disgusting artificialities of the professional ladies' man. He talked to her as he might have talked to a man, of the things that interest intelligent people, regardless of sex. There was never any suggestion of familiarity in his manner, nor in his choice of topics did he ever ignore the fact that she was a young girl. She had felt entirely at ease in his society from the first evening that she had met him, and their acquaintance had grown to a very sensible friendship by the time of the departure of the Ithaca, the rechristened schooner which was to carry them away to an unguessed fate. So they called their boat the Ithaca. I guess they're naming it in honor of his old job at Cornell University. Yeah, for those who don't know, Cornell is in Ithaca, New York. Yeah, right. The voyage from Singapore to the islands was without incident. Virginia took a keen delight in watching the Malays and Lascars at their work, telling von Horn that she had to draw upon her imagination but little to picture herself a captive upon a pirate ship. What? What? Okay. Virginia took a keen delight in watching the Malays and Lascars at their work, telling von Horn that she had to draw upon her imagination but little to picture herself a captive upon a pirate ship. The half-naked men, the gaudy headdress, the earrings, and the fierce countenances of many of the crew furnishing only too realistically the necessary savage setting. Man, she's got some fantasies. A week spent among the Paramount Islands disclosed no suitable site for the professor's camp, nor was it until they had cruised up the coast several miles north of the equator and Cape Santang that they found a tiny island a few miles off the coast, opposite the mouth of a small river, an island which fulfilled in every detail their requirements. It was uninhabited, fertile, and possessed a clear, sweet brook, which had its source in a cold spring in the higher land at the island's center. Here it was that the Ithaca came to anchor in a little harbor, while her crew, under von Horn and the Malay first mate, Boudouin, accompanied Professor Maxon in search of a suitable location for a permanent camp. The cook, a harmless old Chinaman, and Virginia were left in sole possession of the Ithaca. 2 hours after the departure of the men into the jungle, Virginia heard the fall of axes upon timber and knew that the site of her future home had been chosen and the work of clearing begun. She sat musing on the strange freak which had prompted her father to bury them in this savage corner of the globe. And as she pondered, there came a wistful expression to her eyes, and an unwonted sadness drooped the corners of her mouth. Of a sudden, she realized how wide had become the gulf between them now. So imperceptibly had it grown since those 3 horrid days in Ithaca, just prior to their departure, for what was to have been but a few months' cruise, that she had not until now comprehended that the old relations of open good fellowship had gone, possibly forever. Had she needed proof of the truth of her sad discovery, it had been enough to point to the single fact that her father had brought her here, to this little island, without making the slightest attempt to explain the nature of his expedition. She had gleaned enough from von Horn to understand that some important scientific experiments were to be undertaken, but what their nature she could not imagine, for she had not the slightest conception of the success that had crowned her father's last experiment at Ithaca, although she had for years known of his keen interest in the subject. The girl became aware also of other subtle changes in her father. He had long since ceased to be the jovial, carefree companion who had shared with her every girlish joy and sorrow, and in whom she had confided both the trivial and momentous secrets of her childhood. He had become not exactly morose, but rather moody and absorbed, so that she had of late never found an opportunity for the cozy chats that had formerly meant so much to them both. There had been, too, recently, a strange lack of consideration for herself that had wounded her more than she had imagined. Today there had been a glaring example of it in his having left her alone upon the boat without a single European companion, something he would never have thought of doing a few months before. As she sat speculating on the strange change which had come over her father, her eyes had wandered aimlessly along the harbor's entrance, the low reef that protected it from the sea, and the point of land to the south that projected far out into the strait like a gigantic index finger pointing toward the mainland, the foliage-covered heights of which were just visible above the western horizon. Presently her attention was arrested by a tossing speck far out upon the rolling bosom of the strait. For some time the girl watched the object, until at length it resolved itself into a boat moving on toward the island. Later, she saw that it was long and low, propelled by a single sail and many oars, and that it carried quite a company. Thinking it but a native trading boat, so many of which ply the southern seas, Virginia viewed its approach with but idle curiosity. When it had come to within a half-mile of the anchorage of the Ithaca, and was about to enter the mouth of the harbor, Sing Lee's eyes chanced to fall upon it. On the instant, the old man was electrified into sudden and astounding action. "Click, click," he cried, running toward Virginia. "Go blow, click." "Oh, my lord." Okay. "Why should I go below, Sing?" queried the girl, amazed by the demeanor of the cook. "Quick, quick," he urged, grasping her by the arm, half leading, half dragging her toward the companionway. "Pirates! Malay pirates! Dyak pirates!" "What?" "Oh, pirates!" gasped Virginia. "Oh, Sing, what can we do?" "You go below. Maybe Sing fight them. Shoot cannon. Bring help. Maxon come quick. Bring men. Chase him away," explained the Chinaman. "But pirates see him pretty white girl. Man, but this boy, oh boy. Some of the little problematic language here. Okay, we'll get through it. But pirates see him pretty white girl." He shrugged his shoulders and shook his head dubiously. "Then Sing can't frighten them away." The girl shuddered, and, crouching close behind Sing, hurried below. A moment later she heard the boom of the old brass 6-pounder, which for many years had graced the Ithaca's stern. In the bow, Professor Maxon had mounted a modern machine gun, but this was quite beyond Sing's simple gunnery. The Chinaman had not taken the time to sight the ancient weapon carefully, but a gleeful smile lit his wrinkled yellow face as he saw the splash of the ball where it struck the water, almost at the side of the prahu. Is that a type of boat? Prahu? Look it up. A type of sailing boat originating in Malaysia and Indonesia that may be sailed with either end at the front, typically having a large triangular sail and an outrigger. Interesting. Okay. Sing realized that the boat might contain friendly natives, but he had cruised these waters too many years to take chances. Better kill 100 friends, he thought, than be captured by a single pirate. Okay. At the shot, the prahu slowed up, and a volley of musketry from her crew satisfied Sing that he had made no mistake in classifying her. Her fire fell short, as did the ball from the small cannon mounted in her bow. Virginia was watching the prahu from one of the cabin ports. She saw the momentary hesitation and confusion which followed Sing's first shot, and then, to her dismay, she saw the rowers bend to their oars again, and the prahu move swiftly in the direction of the Ithaca. It was apparent that the pirates had perceived the almost defenseless condition of the schooner. In a few minutes they would be swarming the deck, for poor old Sing would be entirely helpless to repel them. If Dr. Von Horn were only there, thought the distracted girl, with the machine gun alone he might keep them off. At the thought of the machine gun, a sudden resolve gripped her. Why not man it herself? Von Horn had explained its mechanism to her in detail, and on occasion had allowed her to operate it on the voyage from Singapore. With the thought came action. Running to the magazine, she snatched up a feed belt, and in another moment was on deck beside the astonished Sing. The pirates were skimming rapidly across the smooth waters of the harbor, answering Sing's harmless shots with yells of derision and wild, savage war cries. There were perhaps 50 Dyaks and Malays, fierce, barbaric men, mostly naked to the waist or with war coats of brilliant colors. The savage headdress of the Dyaks, the long, narrow, decorated shields, the flashing blades of parang and kris sent a shudder through the girl, so close that they seemed beneath the schooner's side. "What to do? What to do?" cried Sing in consternation. "Go below, quick!" But before he had finished his exhortation, Virginia was racing toward the bow, where the machine gun was mounted. Tearing the cover from it, she swung the muzzle toward the pirate prahu, which by now was nearly within range above the vessel's side. A moment more and she would be too close to use the weapon upon the pirates. Virginia was quick to perceive the necessity for haste, while the pirates at the same instant realized the menace of the new danger which confronted them. A score of muskets belched forth their missiles at the fearless girl behind the scant shield of the machine-gun. Leaden pellets rained heavily upon her protection, or whizzed threateningly about her head. And then she got the gun into action. At the rate of 50 a minute, a stream of projectiles tore into the bow of the prahu, when suddenly a richly garbed Malay in the stern rose to his feet, waving a white cloth upon the point of his kris. It was the Rajah Muda Safia. He had seen the girl's face, and at the sight of it, the bloodlust in his breast had been supplanted by another. At sight of the emblem of peace, Virginia ceased firing. She saw the tall Malay issue a few commands. The oarsmen bent to their work. The prahu came about, making off towards the harbor's entrance. At the same moment there was a shot from the shore, followed by loud yelling, and the girl turned to see her father and Von Horn pulling rapidly toward the Ithaca. Well, I'll tell you what, he doesn't waste any time getting into the action, that's for sure. I mean, even the opening paragraph was just right on in there. Man, okay, boy, yeah, but there's, there's going to be some more, some more pseudo-English transcribing going on, I'm pretty sure. All right. So far, so good, though. So far, so good. Oh, let me back up there. Yeah, it is. I think it's going to be a good book, but man, some of the writing is definitely a little problematic. It's okay. We'll get through it. Okay, Chapter 2. Here we go. Virginia and Sing were compelled to narrate the adventure of the afternoon a dozen times. The Chinese man was at a loss to understand what had deterred the pirates at the very threshold of victory. Von Horn thought that they had seen the reinforcements embarking from the shore, but Sing explained that that was impossible, since the Ithaca had been directly between them and the point at which the returning crew had entered the boats. Virginia was positive that her fusillade had frightened them into a hasty retreat, but again Sing discouraged any such idea when he pointed to the fact that another instant would have carried the prahu close to the Ithaca's side and out of the machine-gun's radius of action. The old Chinese man was positive that the pirates had some ulterior motive for simulating defeat, and his long years of experience upon pirate-infested waters gave weight to his opinion. The weak spot in his argument was his inability to suggest a reasonable motive, and so it was that for a long time they were left to futile conjecture as to the action that had saved them from a bloody encounter with these bloodthirsty sea-wolves. For a week the men were busy constructing the new camp, but never again was Virginia left without a sufficient guard for her protection. Von Horn was always needed at the work, for to him had fallen the entire direction of matters of importance that were at all of a practical nature. Professor Maxon wished to watch the building of the houses and the stockade, that he might offer such suggestions as he thought necessary, and again the girl noticed her father's comparative indifference to her welfare. She had been shocked at his apathy at the time of the pirate attack, and chagrined that it should have been necessary for Von Horn to have insisted upon a proper guard being left with her thereafter. The nearer the approach of the time when he might enter again upon those experiments which had now been neglected for the better part of a year, the more self-absorbed and moody became the professor. At times he was scarcely civil to those about him, and never now did he have a pleasant word or a caress for the daughter who had been his whole life but for a few short months before. It often seemed to Virginia, when she caught her father's eyes upon her, that there was a gleam of dislike in them, as though he would have been glad to have been rid of her, that she might not in any way embarrass or interfere with his work. The camp was at last completed, and on a Saturday afternoon all the heavier articles from the ship had been transported to it. On the following Monday the balance of the goods was to be sent on shore, and the party were to transfer their residence to the new quarters. Late Sunday afternoon a small native boat was seen rounding the point at the harbor's southern extremity, and after a few minutes it drew alongside the Ithaca. There were but 3 men in it, 2 Dyaks and a Malay. The latter was a tall, well-built man of middle age, of a sullen and degraded countenance. His garmenture was that of the ordinary Malay boatman, but there was that in his mien and attitude toward his companions which belied his lowly habiliments. In answer to von Horn's hail, the man asked if he might come aboard and trade, but once on the deck it developed that he had brought nothing wherewith to trade. He seemed not the slightest disconcerted by this discovery, stating that he would bring such articles as they wished when he had learned what their requirements were. The ubiquitous Singh was on hand during the interview, but from his expressionless face none might guess what was passing through the tortuous channels of his oriental mind. The Malay had been aboard nearly half an hour talking with von Horn when the mate, Budadreen, came on deck, and it was Singh alone who noted the quick concealed flash of recognition which passed between the 2 Malays. The Chinaman also saw the gleam that shot into the visitor's eye as Virginia emerged from the cabin, but by no word or voluntary outward sign did the man indicate that he had even noticed her. Shortly after he left, promising to return with provisions the following day, but it was to be months before they saw him again. That evening, as Singh was serving Virginia's supper, he asked her if she had recognized their visitor of the afternoon. "Why, no, Singh," she replied. "I never saw him before." "Shh," admonished the Celestial. "Don't talk so strong. Walls have ears. All same labbit." "Man." "What do you mean, Singh?" "That's what I'm asking, too," asked the girl in a low voice. "How perfectly weird and mysterious you are. Why, you make the cold chills run up my spine," she ended, laughing. But Singh did not return her smile, as was his custom. "You don't remember tall Rajah stand up and wave white cloth in the pirate boat?" he urged. "Oh, Singh," she cried, "I do indeed, but unless you had reminded me I should never have thought to connect him with our visitor of today. They do look very much alike, don't they?" "Look alike? They are the same one man. Oh, Singh knows. You look out," which was the closest that Singh had ever come to pronouncing Virginia. "Why should I look out? He doesn't want me," said the girl laughingly. "Don't you be too damn sure about that, Linny," was Singh's inelegant but convincing reply as he turned towards his galley. The following morning the party, with the exception of 3 Malays, who were left to guard the Ithaca, set out for the new camp. The journey was up the bed of the small stream which emptied into the harbor, so that although 15 men had passed back and forth through the jungle, from the beach to the camp, every day for 2 weeks, there was no sign that human foot had ever crossed the narrow strip of sand that lay between the dense foliage and the harbor. The gravel bottom of the rivulet made fairly good walking, and as Virginia was borne in a litter between 2 powerful lascars, it was not even necessary that she wet her feet in the ascent of the stream to the camp. The distance was short, the center of the camp being but a mile from the harbor, and less than half a mile from the opposite shore of the island, which was but 2 miles at its greatest breadth, and 2 1/4 at its greatest length. At the camp, Virginia found that a neat clearing had been made upon a little tableland, a palisade built about it, and divided into 3 parts, the most northerly of which contained a small house for herself and her father, another for Von Horn, and a common cooking and eating house over which Sing was to preside. The enclosure at the far end of the palisade was for the Malay and Lascar crew, and there also were quarters for Boudougrine and the Malay second mate. The center enclosure contained Professor Maxon's workshop. This compartment of the enclosure Virginia was not invited to inspect, but as members of the crew carried in the 2 great chests which the professor had left upon the Ithaca until the last moment, Virginia caught a glimpse of the 2 buildings that had been erected within this central space. A small square house, which was quite evidently her father's laboratory, and a long, low, thatched shed, divided into several compartments, each containing a rude bunk. She wondered for whom they could be intended. Quarters for all the party had already been arranged for elsewhere, nor, thought she, would her father wish to house any in such close proximity to his workshop, where he would desire absolute quiet and freedom from interruption. The discovery perplexed her not a little, but so changed were her relations with her father that she would not question him upon this or any other subject. As the 2 chests were being carried into the central campong, Sing, who was standing near Virginia, called her attention to the fact that Boudougrine was one of those who staggered beneath the weight of the heavier burden. "Boudougrine, he's second mate. Oh, no, boy, oh boy. This pidgin English is terrible. Okay. Boudougrine, he's a mate. Why work the same as the Lascar boys, eh?" But Virginia could give no reason. "I'm afraid you don't like Boudougrine, Sing," she said. "Has he ever harmed you in any way?" "Him? No, he no hurt Sing. Sing poor." With which more or less enigmatical rejoinder, he returned to his work. But he muttered much to himself the balance of the day, for Sing knew that a chest that strained 4 men in the carrying could contain but one thing, and he knew that Boudougrine was as wise in such matters as he. For a couple of months the life of the little hidden camp went on peacefully and without exciting incident. The Malay and Lascar crew divided their time between watch duty on board the Ithaca, policing the camp, and cultivating a little patch of clearing just south of their own campong. There was a small bay on the island's east coast, only a quarter of a mile from camp, in which oysters were found, and one of the Ithaca's boats was brought around to this side of the island for fishing. Boudougrine often accompanied these expeditions, and on several occasions the lynx-eyed Sing had seen him returning to camp long after the others had retired for the night. Professor Maxon scarcely ever left the central enclosure. For days and nights at a time, Virginia never saw him, his meals being passed in to him by Sing through the small trapdoor that had been cut in the partition wall of the Court of Mystery, as Von Horn had christened the section of the camp devoted to the professor's experimentations. Von Horn himself was often with his employer, as he enjoyed the latter's complete confidence, and owing to his early medical training was well fitted to act as a competent assistant, but he was often barred from the workshop, and at such times was much with Virginia. Oh, yeah, that's a good call there, Gianna. The 2 took long walks through the untouched jungle, exploring their little island, and never failing to find some new and wonderful proof of nature's creative power among its flora and fauna. "What a marvelous thing is creation!" exclaimed Virginia, as she and Von Horn paused one day to admire a tropical bird of unusually brilliant plumage. "How insignificant is man's greatest achievement beside the least of nature's works!" "And yet," replied Von Horn, "man shall find nature's secret some day. What a glorious accomplishment for him who first succeeds! Can you imagine a more glorious consummation of a man's life work? Your father's, for example?" The girl looked at von Horn closely. "Dr. von Horn," she said, "pride has restrained me from asking what was evidently intended that I should not know. For years my father has been interested in an endeavor to solve the mystery of life. That he would ever attempt to utilize the secret should he have been so fortunate as to discover it had never occurred to me. I mean, that he should try to usurp the functions of the Creator I could never have believed, but my knowledge of him, coupled with what you have said, and the extreme lengths to which he has gone to maintain absolute secrecy for his present experiments, can only lead to one inference, and that his present work, if successful, would have results that would not be countenanced by civilized society or government. Am I right?" Von Horn had attempted to sound the girl that he might, if possible, discover her attitude toward the work in which her father and he were engaged. He had succeeded beyond his hopes, for he had not intended that she should guess so much of the truth as she had. Should her interest in the work have proved favorable, it had been his intention to acquaint her fully with the marvelous success which had already attended their experiments, and to explain their hopes and plans for the future, for he had seen how her father's attitude had hurt her, and hoped to profit himself by reposing in her the trust and confidence that her father denied her. And so it was that her direct question left him floundering in a sea of embarrassment, for to tell her the truth now would gain him no favor in her eyes, while it certainly would lay him open to the suspicion and distrust of her father, should he learn of it. Rose says this book is so much better. Yeah, it is good, though I'm not enjoying the pidgin English, which all of the Asians here seem to be struck with. But yeah, it's a good pulpy sci-fi. That's good. "I cannot answer your question, Miss Maxon," he said finally, "for your father's strictest injunction has been that I divulge to no one the slightest happening within the court of mystery. Remember that I am in your father's employ, and that no matter what my personal convictions may be regarding the work he has been doing, I may only act with loyalty to his lightest command while I remain upon his payroll. That you are here," he added, "is my excuse for my continuing connection with certain things of which my conscience does not approve." The girl glanced at him quickly. She did not fully understand the motive for his final avowal, and a sudden intuition kept her from questioning him. She had learned to look upon von Horn as a very pleasant companion and a good friend. She was not quite certain that she would care for any change in their relations, but his remark had sowed the seed of a new thought in her mind, as he had intended that it should. When von Horn returned to the court of mystery, he narrated to Professor Maxon the gist of his conversation with Virginia, wishing to forestall anything which the girl might say to her father that would give him an impression that von Horn had been talking more than he should. Professor Maxon listened to the narration in silence. When von Horn had finished, he cautioned him against divulging to Virginia anything that took place within the inner campong. "She is only a child," he said, "and would not understand the importance of the work we are doing. All that she would be able to see is the immediate moral effect of these experiments upon the subjects themselves. She would not look into the future, and appreciate the immense advantage to mankind that must accrue from a successful termination of our research. The future of the world will be assured when once we have demonstrated the possibility of the chemical production of a perfect race." "Number 1, for example," suggested von Horn. Professor Maxon glanced at him sharply. "Levity, Doctor, is entirely out of place in the contemplation of the magnificent work I have already accomplished," said the professor tartly. "I admit that number 1 leaves much to be desired, but number 2 shows a marked advance along certain lines, and I'm sure that tomorrow will divulge in experiment number 3 such strides as will forever silence any propensity toward scoffing which you may now entertain." "Forgive me, Professor," von Horn hastened to urge. "I did not intend to deride the wonderful discoveries which you have made, but it is only natural that we should both realize that number 1 is not beautiful. To one another we may say what we would not think of suggesting to outsiders." Professor Maxon was mollified by this apology, and turned to resume his watch beside a large, coffin-shaped vat. For a while Von Horn was silent. There was that upon his mind which he had wished to discuss with his employer since months ago, but the moment had never arrived which seemed at all propitious, nor did it appear likely ever to arrive. So the doctor decided to broach the subject now, as being psychologically as favorable a time as any. "Your daughter is far from happy, Professor," he said. "Nor do I feel that, surrounded as we are by semi-savage men, she is entirely safe." Professor Maxon looked up from his vigil by the vat, eyeing Von Horn closely. "Well?" he asked. It seemed to me that I had a closer relationship. It seemed to me, had I a closer relationship, I might better assist in adding to her happiness and safety. In short, Professor, I should like your permission to ask Virginia to marry me." There had been no indication in Von Horn's attitude toward the girl that he loved her. That she was beautiful and intelligent could not be denied, and so it was small wonder that she might appeal strongly to any man, but Von Horn was quite evidently not of the marrying type. For years he had roved the world in search of adventure and excitement. Just why he had left America and his high place in the Navy he never had divulged, nor why it was that for 7 years he had not set his foot upon ground which lay beneath the authority of Uncle Sam. Man, he's got a squirrely background. "Oh, up and shared," says Rose. "Thank you. Thank you." Yeah, it'd be nice to get some more peeps in here. They'll show up over time. Sing Lee, who stood just without the trapdoor, through which he was about to pass Professor Maxon's evening meal to him, could not be blamed for overhearing the conversation, though it may have been culpable in him making no effort to divulge his presence, and possibly equally unpraiseworthy, as well as lacking in romance, to attribute the doctor's avowal to his knowledge of the heavy chest. What? As Professor Maxon eyed the man before replying to his abrupt request, Von Horn noted a strange and sudden light in the older man's eyes, something which he had never before seen there, and which caused an uncomfortable sensation to creep over him, a manner of bristling that was akin either to fear or horror. Von Horn could not tell which. Then the professor arose from his seat and came very close to the younger man, until his face was only a few inches from Von Horn's. "Doctor," he whispered in a strange, tense voice, "you are mad. You do not know what you ask. Virginia is not for such as you. Tell me that she does not know of your feelings toward her. Tell me that she does not reciprocate your love. Tell me the truth, man." Professor Maxon seized Von Horn roughly by both shoulders, his glittering eyes glaring terribly into the other's. "I have never spoken to her of love, Professor," Von Horn replied quietly. "Nor do I know what her sentiment toward me may be. Nor do I understand, sir, what objections you may have to me. I am of a very old and noble family." His tone was haughty but respectful. Professor Maxon released his hold upon his assistant, breathing a sigh of relief. "I'm glad," he said, "that it has gone no further, for it must not be. I have other nobler aspirations for my daughter. She must wed a perfect man. None such now exists. It remains for me to bring forth the ideal mate for her, nor is the time far distant. A few more weeks and we shall see such a being as I have long dreamed." Again the queer light flickered for a moment in the once kindly and jovial eyes of the scientist. Von Horn was horrified. He was a man of little sentiment. He could in cold blood have married this girl for the wealth he knew that she would inherit. But the thought that she was to be united with such a thing! Lord, it is horrible. and his mind pictured the fearful atrocity which was known as Number One. Without a word, he turned and left the campong. A moment later, Synge's knock aroused Professor Maxon from the reverie into which he had fallen, and he stepped to the trapdoor to receive his evening meal. Man, this is some crazy mad scientist action. Melissa has retweeted and shared on Facebook and liked on the YouTube. Thank you, Melissa. Boy, all of that helps. Yes, it does. Yeah, we'll get into chapter 3 in just a minute. Man, this is I don't know, you're kind of getting that Island of Dr. Moreau kind of like a vibe kind of thing going on here as well. It's a fun story, but it's boy, I'm not enjoying the portrayal of the Asians. Yeah, I know. Yeah, we'll fix it on the fly as we go, best we can. Man, I wonder how many books this dude ended up writing. He wrote a lot of them. And like tons and tons of sequels, tons of them. A very prolific writer. Okay, we'll get back to it in just 1 second there. What do we got? We got 9 people here. Nice. 9 peeps tuned in. I hope you're all enjoying it as we go. Very good. Oh, okay. I don't know if the alert went off for the. It looks like we got a new follower on the channel. A new follower on the channel, and yeah. I don't have an audible thing on it there, and I'm not looking at the actual monitor as that goes, but I'm curious to know if I'll have to watch the VOD to see if the little animation thing went off. Okay. Chapter 3, Beauty and the Beast. One day, about 2 weeks later, Von Horn and the professor were occupied closely with their work in the Court of Mystery. Developments were coming in riotous confusion. A recent startling discovery bade fair to simplify and expedite the work far beyond the fondest dreams of the scientist. Von Horn's interest in the marvelous results that had been obtained was little short of the professor's, but he foresaw a very different outcome of it all, and by day never moved without a gun at either hip, and by night both of them were beside him. Sing Lee, the noonday meal having been disposed of, set forth with rod, string, and bait to snare gulls upon the beach. He moved quietly through the jungle, his sharp eyes and ears always alert for anything that might savor of the unusual, and so it was that he saw the 2 men upon the beach, while they did not see him at all. They were Boodoo-Dreen and the same tall Malay whom Sing had seen twice before, once in splendid raiment and commanding the pirate prahu, and again as a simple boatman come to the Ithaca to trade, but without the goods to carry out his professed intentions. The 2 squatted on the beach at the edge of the jungle, a short distance above the point at which Sing had been about to emerge when he discovered them, so that it was but the work of a moment or two for the man to creep stealthily through the dense underbrush to a point directly above them, and not 3 yards from where they conversed in low tones, yet sufficiently loud that Sing missed not a single word. "I tell you, Boodoo-Dreen, that it will be quite safe," the tall Malay was saying. "You yourself tell me that none knows of the whereabouts of these white men, and if they do not return, your word will be accepted as to their fate. Your reward will be great if you bring the girl to me, and if you doubt the loyalty of any of your own people, a kriss will silence them as effectually as it will silence the white men." "It is not fear of the white men, O Raja Muda Safia, that deters me," said Boodoo-Dreen. But how shall I know that after I have come to your country with the girl, I shall not myself be set upon and silenced with a golden crease? There may be many that will be jealous of the great service I have done for the mighty Raja." Muda Safir knew perfectly well. See, these guys are speaking like fantastic English. Okay. Muda Safir knew perfectly well that Bududreen had but diplomatically expressed a fear as to his own royal trustworthiness, but it did not anger him, since the charge was not a direct one. But what he did not know was of the heavy chest and Bududreen's desire to win the price of the girl, and yet be able to save for himself a chance at the far greater fortune which he knew lay beneath that heavy oaken lid. Both men had arisen now, and were walking across the beach toward a small native canoe in which Muda Safir had come to the meeting place. They were out of earshot before either spoke again, so that what further passed between them Singh could not even guess. But he had heard enough to confirm the suspicions he had entertained for a long while. He did not fish for gulls that day. Bududreen and Muda Safir stood talking upon the beach, and Singh did not dare venture forth for fear that they might suspect that he had overheard them. If old Sing Lee knew his Malays, he was also wise enough to give them credit for knowing their Chinese, so he waited quietly in hiding until Muda Safir had left and Bududreen returned to camp. Professor Maxon and von Horn were standing over one of the 6 vats that were arranged in 2 rows down the center of the laboratory. The professor had been more communicative and agreeable today than for some time past, and their conversation had assumed more of the familiarity that had marked it during the first month of their acquaintance at Singapore. "And what of these first, who are so imperfect?" asked von Horn. "You cannot take them into civilization, nor would it be right to leave them here upon this island. What will you do with them?" Professor Maxon pondered the question for a moment. "Zombies? You think they're zombies?" Rose has an inquiring mind. Professor Maxon pondered the question for a moment. "I have given the matter but little thought," he said at length. "They are but the accidents of my great work. It is unfortunate that they are as they are, but without them I could have never reached the perfection that I am sure we are to find here." And he tapped lovingly upon the heavy glass cover of the vat before which he stood. "Hey there, Doc Rye. Good morning, good morning." "Good to see you." "Are you just getting up? Are you going to bed? I know it's you keep the strangest hours." "It is unfortunate that they are as they are, but without them I could never have reached the perfection that I'm sure we are to find here." And he tapped lovingly upon the heavy glass cover of the vat before which he stood. "And this is but the beginning. There can be no more mistakes now, though I doubt if we can ever improve upon that which is so rapidly developing here." Again he passed his long, slender hand caressingly over the coffin-like vat, at the head of which was a placard bearing the words, "Number 13. "But the others, Professor," insisted von Horn. "We must decide. Already they have become a problem of no small dimensions. Yesterday, number 5 desired some plantains that I had given to number 7. I tried to reason with him, but, as you know, he's mentally defective, and for answer he rushed at number 7 to tear the coveted morsel from him. The result was a battle royale that might have put to shame 2 Bengal tigers. 12 is tractable and intelligent. With his assistance and my bullwhip I succeeded in separating them before either was killed. Your greatest error was in striving at first for such physical perfection. You've overdone it, with the result that the court of mystery is peopled by a dozen brutes of awful muscularity, and scarcely enough brain among the dozen to equip 3 properly." "They are as they are," replied the professor. "I shall do for them what I can. When I am gone, they must look to themselves. I can see no way out of it." "What you have given you may take away," said von Horn in a low tone. Professor Maxon shuddered. Those 3 horrid days in the workshop at Ithaca flooded his memory with all the gruesome details he had tried for so many months to forget. The haunting ghosts of the mental anguish that had left him an altered man, so altered that there were times when he had feared for his sanity. "No, no," he almost shouted. "It would be murder. They are—" "They are things," interrupted von Horn. "They are not human. They are not even beast. They are terrible, soulless creatures. You have no right to permit them to live longer than to substantiate your theory. None but us knows of their existence. No other need know of their passing. It must be done. They are a constant and growing menace to us all, but most of all to your daughter." Now, everyone is after the daughter. I'm pretty sure she's the only woman in all of Asia. The way everyone's going after her. A cunning look came into the professor's eyes. "I understand," he said. "The precedent once established, all must perish by its edict, even those which may not be grotesque or bestial, even this perfect one." And he again touched the vat. "And thus you would rid yourself of rival suitors. But no," he went on in a high, trembling voice, "I shall not be led to thus compromise myself, and be thwarted in my cherished plan. Be this one what he may, he shall wed my daughter." The man had raised himself upon his toes as he reached his climax. His clenched hand was high above his head. His voice fairly thundered out the final sentence, and with the word he brought his fist down upon the vat before him. In his eyes blazed the light of unchained madness. Von Horn was a brave man, but he shuddered at the maniacal ferocity of the older man, and shrank back. The futility of argument was apparent, and he turned and left the workshop. Sing Li was late that night. In fact, he did not return from his fruitless quest for gulls until well after dark, nor would he vouchsafe any explanation of the consequent lateness of supper. Nor could he be found shortly after the evening meal, when Virginia sought him. Not until the camp was wrapped in the quiet of slumber did Sing Li return, stealthy and mysterious, to creep under cover of a moonless night to the door of the workshop. How he gained entrance only Sing Li knows, but a moment later there was a muffled crash of broken glass within the laboratory, and the Chinaman had slipped out, relocked the door, and scurried to his nearby shack. But there was no occasion for his haste. No other ear than his had heard the sound within the workshop. It was almost 9 the following morning before Professor Maxon and von Horn entered the laboratory. Scarcely had the older man passed the doorway than he drew up his hands in horrified consternation. Vat 13 lay dashed to the floor. The glass cover was broken to 1,000,000 pieces. A sticky, brownish substance covered the matting. Professor Maxon hid his face in his hands. "God," he cried, "it's all ruined. 3 more days would have—" "Look," cried von Horn, "it is not too soon." Professor Maxon mustered courage to raise his eyes from his hands, and there he beheld, seated in a far corner of the room, a handsome giant, physically perfect. The creature looked about him in a dazed, uncomprehending manner. A great question was writ large upon his intelligent countenance. Professor Maxon stepped forward and took him by the hand. "Come," he said, and led him toward a smaller room off the main workshop. The giant followed docilely, his eyes roving about the room, the pitiful questioning still upon his handsome features. Von Horn turned toward the campong. Virginia, deserted by all, even the faithful Sing, who, cheated of his sport on the preceding day, had again gone to the beach to snare gulls, became restless of the enforced idleness and solitude. For a time she wandered about the little compound which had been reserved for the whites, but tiring of this, she decided to extend her stroll beyond the palisade, a thing which she had never done unless accompanied by von Horn, a thing both he and her father had cautioned her against. What danger can there be? She thought. We know that the island is uninhabited by others than ourselves, and there are no dangerous beasts. And anyway, there's no one now who seems to care what becomes of me, unless... I wonder if he does care. I wonder if I care whether or not he cares. Oh dear, I wish I knew. And as she soliloquized, she wandered past the little clearing and into the jungle that lay behind the campong. As Von Horn and Professor Maxon talked together in the laboratory before the upsetting of vat number 13, a grotesque and horrible creature had slunk from the low shed at the opposite side of the campong until it had crouched at the flimsy door of the building in which the two men conversed. For a while it listened intently, but when Von Horn urged the necessity for dispatching certain terrible soulless creatures, an expression of intermingled fear and hatred convulsed the hideous features, and like a great grizzly it turned and lumbered awkwardly across the campong toward the easterly or back wall of the enclosure. Good morning, Scorpion Knights. Good to see you. Good to see you. Mad scientists ahoy. Here it leaped futilely a half-dozen times for the top of the palisade, and then, trembling and chattering in rage, it ran back and forth along the base of the obstacle, just as a wild beast in captivity paces angrily before the bars of its cage. Finally it paused to look once more at the senseless wood that barred its escape, as though measuring the distance to the top. Then the eyes roamed about the campong to rest at last upon the slanting roof of the thatched shed which was its shelter. Presently a slow idea was born in the poor, malformed brain. The creature approached the shed. He could just reach the saplings that formed the framework of the roof. Like a huge sloth he drew himself to the roof of the structure. From here he could see beyond the palisade, and the wild freedom of the jungle called to him. He did not know what it was, but in its leafy wall he perceived many breaks and openings that offered concealment from the creatures who were plotting to take his life. Yet the wall was not fully 6 feet from him, and the top of it at least 5 feet above the top of the shed. Those who had designed the campong had been careful to set this structure sufficiently far from the palisade to prevent its forming too easy an avenue of escape. The creature glanced fearfully toward the workshop. He remembered the cruel bullwhip that always followed each new experiment on his parts. He remembered the cruel bullwhip that always followed each new experiment on his part that did not coincide with the desires of his master, and as he thought of Von Horn, a nasty gleam shot his mismated eyes. He tried to reach across the distance between the roof and the palisade, and in the attempt lost his balance and nearly precipitated himself to the ground below. Cautiously he drew back, still looking about for some means to cross the chasm. One of the saplings of the roof, protruding beyond the palm-leaf thatch, caught his attention. With a single wrench he tore it from its fastenings. Extending it toward the palisade, he discovered that it just spanned the gap, but he dared not attempt to cross upon a single slender strand. Quickly he ripped off a half-dozen other poles from the roof, and laying them side by side, formed a safe and easy path to freedom. A moment more, and he sat astride the top of the wall. Drawing the poles after him, he dropped them one by one to the ground outside the campong. Then he lowered himself to liberty. Gathering the saplings under one huge arm, he ran lumberingly into the jungle. He would not leave evidence of the havoc he had wrought. The fear of the bullwhip was still strong upon him. The green foliage closed about him, and the peaceful jungle gave no sign of the horrid brute that roamed its shadowed mazes. Man, bad things gonna be happening. This is it's all kinds of terrible decisions going on here. Oh boy. But I don't know, mad scientist, what you gonna do, right? As Von Horn stepped into the campong, his quick eye perceived the havoc that had been wrought with the roof at the east end of the shed. Quickly he crossed to the low structure. Within its compartments, a number of deformed monsters squatted upon their haunches or lay prone upon the native mats that covered the floor. As the man entered, they looked furtively at the bullwhip which trailed from his right hand, and then glanced fearfully at one another, as though questioning which was the malefactor on this occasion. Von Horn ran his eyes over the hideous assemblage. "Where is number one?" he asked, directing his question toward a thing whose forehead gave greater promise of intelligence than any of his companions. The one addressed shook his head. Von Horn turned and made a circuit of the campong. There was no sign of the missing one, and no indication of any other irregularity than the demolished portion of the roof. With an expression of mild concern upon his face, he entered the workshop. "Number one has escaped into the jungle, Professor," he said. Professor Maxon looked up in surprise, but before he had an opportunity to reply, a woman's scream, shrill with horror, smote upon their startled ears. Von Horn was the first to reach the campong of the whites. Professor Maxon was close behind him, and the faces of both were white with apprehension. The enclosure was deserted. Not even Sing was there. Without a word, the two men sprang through the gateway and raced for the jungle in the direction from which that single, haunting cry had come. Virginia Maxon, idling beneath the leafy shade of the tropical foliage, became presently aware that she had wandered farther from the campong than she had intended. The day was sultry, and the heat, even in the dense shade of the jungle, oppressive. Slowly she retraced her steps, her eyes upon the ground, her mind absorbed in sad consideration of her father's increasing moodiness and eccentricity. Possibly it was this very abstraction which deadened her senses to the near approach of another. At any rate, the girl's first intimation that she was not alone came when she raised her eyes to look full into the horrid countenance of a fearsome monster which blocked her path toward camp. The sudden shock brought a single involuntary scream from her lips, and who can wonder? The thing thrust so unexpectedly before her eyes was hideous in the extreme. A great mountain of deformed flesh, clothed in dirty white cotton pajamas. Its face was of the ashen hue of a fresh corpse, while the white hair and pink eyes denoted the absence of pigment, a characteristic of albinos. One eye was fully twice the diameter of the other, and an inch above the horizontal plane of its tiny mate. The nose was but a gaping orifice above a deformed and twisted mouth. The thing was chinless, and its small foreheadless head surrounded its colossal body like a cannonball on a hilltop. One arm was at least 12 inches longer than its mate, which was itself long in proportion to the torso, while the legs, similarly mismated and terminating in huge flat feet that protruded laterally, caused the thing to lurch fearfully from side to side as it lumbered toward the girl. A sudden grimace lighted the frightful face as the grotesque eyes fell upon this new creature. Number one had never before seen a woman, but the sight of this one awoke in the unplumbed depths of his soulless breast a great desire to lay his hands upon her. She was very beautiful. Number one wished to have her for his very own. Nor would it be a difficult matter, so fragile was she, to gather her up in those great brute arms and carry her deep into the jungle, far out of hearing of the bullwhip man and the cold, frowning one, who was continually measuring and weighing number one and his companions, the while he scrutinized them with those strange, glittering eyes that frightened one even more than the cruel lash of the bullwhip. Good Lord, that was one heck of a sentence. Well, boy. Good morning, Baghdad Money. Good morning. Yeah, it's been a pretty good day so far. Pretty good day so far. Hope yours is good too. It's going to be a good week, I think. A pretty good week. Number one lurched forward, his arms outstretched toward the horror-stricken girl. Virginia tried to cry out again. She tried to turn and run, but the horror of her impending fate and the terror that those awful features induced left her paralyzed and helpless. The thing was almost upon her now. The mouth was wide in a hideous attempt to smile. The great hands would grasp her in another second. And then there was a sudden crashing of the underbrush behind her. A yellowed, wrinkled face and a flying pigtail shot past her, and the brave old Sing Lee grappled with the mighty monster that threatened her. The battle was short and terrible. The valiant Chinaman sought the ashen throat of his antagonist, but his wiry, sinewy muscles were as reeds beneath the force of that inhuman power that opposed them. Holding the girl at arm's length in one hand, Number One tore the battling man from him with the other, and lifted him bodily above his head, hurled him stunned and bleeding against the bole of a giant buttressed tree. Then, lifting Virginia in his arms once more, he dived into the impenetrable mazes of the jungle that lined the more open pathway between the beach and camp. Man. Oh, yeah. Okay. We got some good action happening. Man. Oh, man. Okay. Yeah, we definitely got time for one more chapter. Definitely time for one more chapter. I can't believe it's 11:30 already. Man, time is just sneaking by today. Okay. Oh, let's little sip of the old water before we get on in there. This is it's such a weird book, this one. You know, I think this might be the most action-packed thing by Edgar Rice Burroughs that we've read. It does bag of money. Bag that money. Day is just flying by. Flying by. Boy, oh boy. Here we go. Just like this book. Chapter 4. A New Face. As Professor Maxon and von Horn rushed from the workshop to their own campong, they neglected in their haste to lock the door between, and for the first time since the camp was completed, it stood unlatched and ajar. You know, before we go any further, just thinking out loud, Sing Lee. I think Sing Lee is going to die, but he has not told anyone of that one pirate guy has been secretly meeting with Boudoudraine to betray them. Yeah, boy, all kinds of terrible mistakes by people in this. Yeah. In their haste, and they neglected in their haste to lock the door between, and for the first time since the camp was completed, it stood unlatched and ajar. The professor had been engaged in taking careful measurements of the head of his latest experiment, the while he coached the young man in the first rudiments of spoken language, and now the subject of his labors found himself suddenly deserted and alone. He had not yet been without the four walls of the workshop, as the professor had wished to keep him from association with the grotesque results of his earlier experiments. And now a natural curiosity tempted him to approach the door, through which his creator and the man with the bullwhip had so suddenly disappeared. He saw before him a great walled enclosure. Drop my mouse. 1 second. Get it. Yeah. All the way down there. Okay. Man, okay. Get that bigger. Yeah, okay, gotta go. Okay. He saw before him a great walled enclosure, roofed by a lofty azure dome, and beyond the walls the tops of green trees, swaying gently in the soft breezes. His nostrils tasted the incense of fresh earth and growing things. For the first time he felt the breath of nature, free and unconfined, upon his brow. He drew his giant frame to its full height, and drank in the freedom and the sweetness of it all, filling his great lungs to their fullest. And with the first taste he learned to hate the close and stuffy confines of his prison. His virgin mind was filled with wonder at the wealth of new impressions which surged to his brain through every sense. He longed for more, and the open gateway of the campong was a scarce-needed invitation to pass to the wide world beyond. With the free and easy tread of utter consciousness, no, with the free and easy tread of utter unconsciousness of self, he passed across the enclosure and stepped out into the clearing which lay between the palisade and the jungle. Yeah, I know, BW. As soon as you drop it, like the battery thing opens up, the batteries go flying all over the place as well. It almost explodes when you drop it. Ah, here was the more still beautiful world. The green leaves nodded to him, and at their invitation he came, and the jungle reached out its million arms to embrace him. Now before him, behind, on either side, there was naught but glorious green beauty, shot with splashes of gorgeous color that made him gasp in wonderment. Brilliant birds rose from amidst it all, skimming hither and thither above his head. He thought that the flowers and the birds were the same, and when he reached out and plucked a blossom tenderly, he wondered that it did not flutter in his hand. On and on he walked, but slowly, for he must not miss a single sight in the strange and wonderful place. And then, of a sudden, the quiet beauty of the scene was harshly broken by the crashing of a monster through the underbrush. Number 13 was standing in a little open place in the jungle when the discordant note first fell upon his ears, and as he turned his head in the direction of the sound, he was startled at the hideous aspect of the thing which broke through the foliage before him. What a horrid creature! But on the same instant his eyes fell upon another born in the arms of the terrible one. This one was different, very different, soft and beautiful and white. He wondered what it all meant, for everything was strange and new to him, but when he saw the eyes of the lovely one upon him, and her arms outstretched toward him, though he did not understand the words upon her lips, he knew that she was in distress. Something told him it was the ugly thing that carried her that was the author of her suffering. Virginia Maxon had been half unconscious from fright when she suddenly saw a white man, clothed in coarse, white native pajamas, confronting her and the misshapen beast that was bearing her away to what frightful fate she could but conjecture. At the sight of the man her voice returned with returning hope, and she reached her arms toward him, calling upon him to save her. Although he did not respond, she thought that he understood her, for he sprang toward them before her appeal was scarce uttered. As before, when Sing had threatened to filch his new possession from him, Number 1 held the girl with one hand while he met the attack of this new assailant with the other. But here was very different metal than had succumbed to him before. It is true that Number 13 knew nothing whatever of personal combat, but Number 1 had but little advantage of him in the matter of experience, while the former was equipped with great natural intelligence, as well as steel muscles, no whit less powerful than his deformed predecessor. So it was that the awful giant found his single hand helpless to cope with the strength of his foeman, and in an instant felt powerful fingers clutching at his throat. Still reluctant to surrender his hold upon his prize, he beat futilely at the face of his enemy, but at last the agony of choking compelled him to drop the girl, and grapple madly with the man who choked him with one hand and rained mighty and merciless blows upon his face and head with the other. His captive sank to the ground, too weak from the effects of nervous shock to escape, and with horror-filled eyes watched the two who battled over her. She saw that her would-be rescuer was young and strong-featured, altogether a very fine specimen of manhood, and to her great wonderment it was soon apparent that he was no unequal match for the great mountain of muscle that he fought. both tore and struck and clawed and bit in the frenzy of mad, untutored strife, rolling about on the soft carpet of the jungle almost noiselessly, except for their heavy breathing and an occasional beast-like snarl from number one. For several minutes they fought thus, until the younger man succeeded in getting both hands upon the throat of his adversary, and then, choking relentlessly, he raised the brute with him from the ground and rushed him fiercely backward against the stem of a tree. Again and again he hurled the monstrous thing upon the unyielding wood, until at last it hung helpless and inert in his clutches. Then he cast it from him, and without another glance at it, turned toward the girl. Here was a problem indeed. Now that he had won her, what was he to do with her? He was but an adult child, with the brain and brawn of a man, and the ignorance and inexperience of the newborn. And so he acted as a child acts, in imitation of what it has seen others do. The brute had been carrying the lovely creature, therefore that must be the thing for him to do, and so he stooped and gathered Virginia Maxon in his great arms. She tried to tell him that she could walk after a moment's rest, but it was soon evident that he did not understand her, as a puzzled expression came to his face, and he did not put her down as she asked. Instead, he stood irresolute for a time, and then moved slowly through the jungle. By chance his direction was toward the camp, and this fact so relieved the girl's mind that presently she was far from loath to remain quietly in his arms. After a moment she gained courage to look up into his face. She thought that she never had seen so marvelously clean she thought that she never had seen so marvelously clean-cut features, or a more high and noble countenance, and she wondered how it was that this white man was upon the island and she had not known it. Possibly he was a new arrival, his presence unguessed even by her father. That he was neither English nor American was evident from the fact that he could not understand her native tongue. Who could he be? What was he doing upon their island? As she watched his face, he suddenly turned his eyes down upon her, and as she looked hurriedly away she was furious with herself as she felt a crimson flush mantle her cheek. The man only half sensed, in a vague sort of way, the meaning of the telltale color and the quickly averted eyes. But he became suddenly aware of the pressure of her delicate body against his, as he had not been before. Now he kept his eyes upon her face as he walked, and a new emotion filled his breast. He did not understand it, but it was very pleasant, and he knew that it was because of the radiant thing that he carried in his arms. The scream that had startled von Horn and Professor Maxon led them along the trail toward the east coast of the island, and about halfway of the distance they stumbled upon the dazed and bloody Sing just as he was on the point of regaining consciousness. "For God's sake, Sing, what's the matter?" cried von Horn. "Where is Miss Maxon?" "Big brute. He caught Lenny. Tried to kill Sing. Head hit the tree. I can't see any more. Wake up. They're all gone," moaned the man as he tried to gain his feet. "Which way did he take her?" urged von Horn. Sing's quick eyes scanned the surrounding jungle, and in a moment, staggering to his feet, he cried, "Look, see, quick, footprints!" and ran, quick and reeling drunkenly, along the broad trail made by the giant creature and its prey. Man, that pidgin English is killing me. Right. Von Horn and Professor Maxon followed closely in Sing's wake, the younger man horrified by the terrible possibilities that obtruded them. Obtruded. Obtrude? I'm just going to quickly look that one up. Obtrude, become noticeable in an unwelcome or intrusive way. Okay. Von Horn and Professor Maxon followed closely in Sing's wake, the younger man horrified by the terrible possibilities that obtruded themselves into his imagination, despite every effort to assure himself that no harm could come to Virginia Maxon before they reached her. The girl's father had not spoken since they discovered that she was missing from the campong, but his face was white and drawn, his eyes wide and glassy, as those of one whose mind is on the verge of madness from a great nervous shock. The trail of the creature was bewilderingly erratic. A dozen paces straight through the underbrush, then a sharp turn at right angles for no apparent reason, only to veer again suddenly in a new direction. Thus, turning and twisting, the tortuous way led them toward the south end of the island, until Sing, who was in advance, gave a sharp cry of surprise. "Quick, look here!" he cried excitedly. "The big brute's dead, very much dead." Von Horn rushed forward to where the man was leaning over the body of number one. Sure enough, the great brute lay motionless, its horrid face even more hideous in death than in life, if it were possible. The face was black, the tongue protruded, the skin was bruised from the heavy fist of his assailant, and the thick skull crushed and splintered from terrific impact with the tree. Professor Maxon leaned over Von Horn's shoulder. "Oh, poor number one," he sighed, "that you should come to such an untimely end. My child, my child." Von Horn looked at him, a tinge of compassion in his rather hard face. It touched the man that his employer was at last shocked from the obsession of his work to a realization of the love and duty he owed his daughter. He thought the professor's last words referred to Virginia. "Ah, though there are 12 more," continued Professor Maxon, "you were my firstborn son, and I loved you most, dear child." The younger man was horrified. "My God, Professor," he cried, "are you mad? Can you call this thing child and mourn over it when you do not yet know the fate of your own daughter?" Professor Maxon looked up sadly. "You do not understand, Dr. Von Horn," he replied coldly, "and you will oblige me in the future by not again referring to the offspring of my labors as things." With an ugly look upon his face, Von Horn turned his back upon the older man. What little feeling of loyalty and affection he had ever felt for him gone forever. Sing was looking about for evidences of the cause of number one's death and the probable direction in which Virginia Maxon had disappeared. "What on earth could have killed this enormous brute, Sing? Have you any idea?" asked Von Horn. Sing shook his head. "I don't know," he replied. "Big flight. Big flight? Oh, big fight. Oh, my God. Big fight. Look here." And he pointed to the torn and trampled turf, the broken bushes, and to one or two small trees that had been snapped off by the impact of the two mighty bodies that had struggled back and forth about the clearing. "This way," cried Sing. Oh, it's Sing. "This way," cried Sing presently, and started off once more into the brush, but this time in a northwesterly direction, toward camp. In silence the three men followed the new trail, all puzzled beyond measure to account for the death of number one at the hands of what must have been a creature of superhuman strength. What could it have been? It was impossible that any of the Malays or Lascars could have done the thing, and there were no other creatures, brute or human, upon the island large enough to have coped even for an instant with the ferocious brutality of the dead monster. "Well, okay, we'll catch you later there, bag of money." Big bag of money. Blip, blip. And there were no other creatures, brute or human, upon the island large enough to have coped even for an instant with the ferocious brutality of the dead monster, except Von Horn's brain came to a sudden halt at the thought. Could it be? There seemed no other explanation. Virginia Maxon had been rescued from one soulless monstrosity to fall into the hands of another, equally irresponsible and terrifying. Others, then, must have escaped from the camp. Von Horn loosened his guns in their holsters and took a fresh grip upon his bullwhip as he urged Sing forward upon the trail. He wondered which one it was, but not once did it occur to him that the latest result of Professor Maxon's experiments could be the rescuer of Virginia Maxon. In his mind he could only see the repulsive features of one of the others. Quite unexpectedly they came upon the two, and with a shout Von Horn leaped forward, his bullwhip upraised. Number 13 turned in surprise at the cry, and sensing a new danger for her who lay in his arms, he set her gently upon the ground behind him and advanced to meet his assailant. "Out of the way, you monstrosity!" cried Von Horn. "If you have harmed Miss Maxon, I'll put a bullet in your heart." Number 13 did not understand the words that the other addressed to him, but he interpreted the man's actions as menacing, not to himself, but to the creature he now considered his particular charge, and so he met the advancing man, more to keep him from the girl than to offer him bodily injury, for he recognized him as one of the two who had greeted his first dawning consciousness. Von Horn, possibly intentionally, William's here. What's up? What's up, man? Von Horn, possibly intentionally, misinterpreted the other's motive, and raising his bullwhip, struck Number 13 a vicious cut across the face, at the same time leveling his revolver point blank at the broad beast. But before ever he could pull the trigger, an avalanche of muscle was upon him, and he went down to the rotting vegetation of the jungle with 5 sinewy figures at his throat. His revolver exploded harmlessly in the air, and then another hand wrenched it from him and hurled it far into the underbrush. Number 13 knew nothing of the danger of firearms, but the noise had startled him, and his experience with the stinging cut of the bullwhip convinced him that this other was some sort of instrument of torture, of which it would be as well to deprive his antagonist. Virginia Maxon looked on in horror as she realized that her rescuer was quickly choking Dr. Von Horn to death. With a little cry she sprang to her feet and ran forward toward them, just as her father emerged from the underbrush through which he had been struggling, in the trail of the agile Sing and Von Horn. Placing her hand upon the great wrist of the giant, she tried to drag his fingers from Von Horn's throat, pleading meanwhile with both voice and eyes for the life of the man she thought loved her. Again Number 13 translated the intent without understanding the words, and releasing Von Horn, permitted him to rise. With a bound he was upon his feet, and at the same instant brought his other gun from his side and leveled it upon the man who had released him. But as his finger tightened upon the trigger, Virginia Maxon sprang between them, and grasping Von Horn's wrist, deflected the muzzle of the gun just as the cartridge exploded. Simultaneously, Professor Maxon sprang from his grasp and hurled him back with the superhuman strength of a maniac. "Fool!" he cried. "What would you do? Kill—" And then of a sudden he realized his daughter's presence and the necessity for keeping the origin of the young giant from her knowledge. "I'm surprised at you, Dr. Horn," he continued in a more level voice. "You must indeed have forgotten yourself to thus attack a stranger upon our island until you know whether he be friend or foe. Come, escort my daughter to the camp while I make the proper apologies to this gentleman." As he saw that both Virginia and Von Horn hesitated, he repeated his command in a peremptory tone, adding, "Quick now, do as I bid you." The moment had given Von Horn an opportunity to regain his self-control, and realizing, as well as did his employer, but from another motive, the moment had given Von Horn an opportunity to regain his self-control, and realizing, as well as did his employer, but from another motive, the necessity of keeping the truth from the girl, he took her arm and led her gently from the scene. At Professor Maxon's direction, Sing accompanied them. Now, in number 13's brief career, he had known no other authority than Professor Maxon's, and so it was that when his master laid a hand upon his wrist, he remained beside him, while another walked away with the lovely creature he had thought his very own. Until after dark, the professor kept the young man hidden in the jungle, and then, safe from detection, led him back to the laboratory. Yeah. That's, boy, tell you what, this has been non-stop action. Non-stop. Stumbling over a few things. Replacing that terrible pidgin English best I can as we go. We're getting in there. How you doing, William? Good to see you, man. Good to see you. Oh, boy, oh, boy. I thought I broke. Okay, I didn't break my mouse. Okay, so far so okay. But that's as far as we're going with this today. We still got time for a little short story, though. We can get something in from Time and the Gods, little by little, working our way through that. Yeah. William's doing okay. Very nice. Melissa thought that was fantastic. So is this book good so far? Are you all enjoying it? Baghdad Money says, good book so far. Yeah. Like everything we do, of course, it is in the public domain. So you can get a free digital download. Like I said, it's hard to find the free one on Amazon from the Kindle store, but it is in there. Actually, I'll stick a link in Discord directly to the free one. I don't have it here on this PC. And of course, it's also over on Gutenberg as well. Yeah. So, but yeah, Edgar Rice Burroughs, he's, I mean, a very well-known, prolific author. Came up with some stuff. They're still making movies based on his ideas. Not all of them making any money. That John Carter movie was terrible. John Carter of Mars. Terrible movie. But the books were insanely popular. Yeah, they just spent way too much money on that. Yeah, but the yeah. So I was trying to think of who wrote King Kong. That is something actually I'm going to look that up right now. Actually. King Kong. I mean, not a book. Was it actually? Who actually wrote it? Who's it? Okay, here's okay. Someone wrote a little King Kong by Edgar Wallace. The original novelization of it. That's Who's this? Okay. Who wrote it? It's a 1932 novelization of the okay, right, of the 1933 film. Okay, interesting. Okay, so that's from 1932. Okay, just looking that up real fast. Okay, Melissa likes it. So, okay, cool. Okay, but that's as far as we're going today. We'll pick it up again tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. But we got time for Time and the Gods. The where are we up to? What's this one here? The Fields of Twilight. The Jest of the Gods. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Part 2. Yeah, okay. We're just going to end with this. This will be a part. Okay, we'll just end with this little short story by Lord Dunsany from Time and the Gods. Looks like this is a multi-part. The Dreams of the Prophet. How many are there? That's 2. Is there a 3? Oh, that's a long one. Okay. Yeah, that. Wow, that's a long one. Good Lord. That might take a whole day. Wow. Oh yeah, let me back up. You know, we're not going to do that. Let's I'm just going to pick a different thing here real fast then. Okay, 1 second. Let's just turn off the Kindle here for a second. Library. What is... Where is my... There we go. So we got something in here. This, don't change. This is The Traveling Companion. That's all super long. Hey, let's open up here. Turn this back on. I'm just looking for something, just some short stuff here. 9, 10, 11, 12, no, too far, too long. Andrew Lang. Good Lord, there's a lot of these in here. Prince Hyacinth. Huh. Where is, oh, he's right at the very beginning. Hans Christian Andersen. Oh, that's the chest and the money. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, these are all longer than I thought as well. Okay, let's we're gonna grab where's my... Just gonna grab something real fast here. The Idle City. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Yeah, we'll do that one. There we go. The Idle City by Lord Dunsany. Okay, I'm not going to do that one from 51 to, from the Time and the Gods, rather, because it's going to take it's long. It looks like it's going to be a whole day. Actually, we should do that on Short Story Sunday. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so here's just a little piece. This is from was the Book of Wonder. Was it the Book of Wonder, or was it? No, it's from A Dreamer's Tales. A Dreamer's Tales. Here we go. We've read this one before, but yeah, we'll just end with this one here. I haven't read this in a long time. The Idle City. There was once a city, which was an idle city, wherein men told vain tales. And it was that city's custom to tax all men that would enter in with the toll of some idle story in the gate. So all men paid to the watches in the gate the toll of an idle story, and passed into the city unhindered and unhurt. And in a certain hour of the night, when the king of that city arose, and went pacing swiftly up and down the chamber of his sleeping, and called upon the name of the dead queen, then would the watchers fasten up the gate, and go into that chamber to the king, and sitting on the floor would tell him all the tales that they had gathered. And listening to them, some calmer mood would come upon the king, and listening still, he would lie down again, and at last fall asleep, and all the watchers silently would arise and steal away from the chamber. A while ago, wandering, I came to the gate of that city, and even as I came, a man stood up to pay his toll to the watchers. They were seated cross-legged on the ground between him and the gate, and each one held a spear. Near him 2 other travelers sat on the warm sand waiting. And the man said, Now the city of Nombros forsook the worship of the gods, and turned toward God. So the gods threw their cloaks over their faces, and strode away from the city, and going into the haze among the hills, passed through the trunks of the olive groves into the sunset. But when they had already left the earth, they turned and looked through the gleaming folds of the twilight for the last time at their city. And they looked half in anger and half in regret, then turned and went away forever. But they sent back a death, who bore a scythe, saying to it, Slay half in the city that forsook us, but half of them spare alive, that they may yet remember their old forsaken gods. But God sent a destroying angel to show that he was God, saying unto him, Go into that city, and slay half of the dwellers therein, yet spare a half of them, that they may know that I am God. And at once the destroying angel put his hand to his sword, and the sword came out of the scabbard with a deep breath, like to the breath that a broad woodsman takes before his first blow at some giant oak. Thereat the angel pointed his arm downwards, and, bending his head between them, fell forward from heaven's edge, and the spring of his ankle shot him downwards with his wings furled behind him. So he went slanting earthward through the evening with his sword stretched out before him, and he was like a javelin that some hunter hath hurled, that returneth again to the earth. But just before he touched it, he lifted his head and spread his wings with the under feathers forward, and alighted by the bank of the broad Flavro that divides the city of Nombros. And down the bank of the Flavro he fluttered low, like a hawk over a new-cut cornfield, when the little creatures of the corn are shelterless. And at the same time, down the other bank, the death from the gods went mowing. At once they saw each other, and the angel glared at the death, and the death leered back at him, and the flames in the eyes of the angel illumined with a red glare the mist that lay in the hollows of the sockets of the death. Suddenly they fell on one another, sword to scythe. And the angel captured the temples of the gods, and set up over them the sign of God. And the death captured the temples of God, and led into them the ceremonies and sacrifices of the gods. And all the while the centuries slipped quietly by, going down the Flavro seawards. And now some worship God in the temple of the gods, and others worship the gods in the temple of God. And still the angel hath not returned again to the rejoicing choirs, and still the death hath not gone back to die with the dead gods. But all through Nombros they fight up and down, and still on each side of the Flavro the city lives. And the watchers in the gate said, Enter in. Then another traveler rose up and said, Solemnly between Huanhuazi and Nkrana the huge grey clouds came floating, and those great mountains, heavenly Huanhuazi and Nkrana, the king of peaks, greeted them, calling them brothers. And the clouds were glad of their greeting, for they meet with companions seldom in the lonely heights of the sky. But the vapours of evening said unto the earth-mist, What are those shapes that dare to move above us, and to go where Nkrana is, and Huanhuazi? And the earth-mist said in answer unto the vapours of evening, It is only an earth-mist that has become mad, and has left the warm, comfortable earth, and has in his madness thought that his place is with Huanhuazi and Nkrana. Once, said the vapors of evening, there were clouds, but this was many and many a day ago, as our forefathers have said. Perhaps the mad one thinks he is the clouds. Then spake the earthworms from the warm deeps of the mud, saying, O earth mist, thou art indeed the clouds, and there are no clouds but thou. And as for Huanhuazi and Nithkrana, I cannot see them, and therefore they are not high. And there are no mountains in the world, but those that I cast up every morning out of the deeps of the mud. And the earth mist and the vapors of evening were glad at the voice of the earthworms, and looking earthward, believed what they had said. And indeed, it is better to be as the earth mist, and to keep close to the warm mud at night, and to hear the earthworm's comfortable speech, and not to be a wanderer in the cheerless heights, but to leave the mountains alone with their desolate snow, to draw what comfort they can from their vast aspect over all the cities of men, and from the whispers that they hear at evening of unknown distant gods. And the watchers in the gate said, Enter in. Then a man stood up who had come out of the west, and told a western tale. He said, There is a road in Rome that runs through an ancient temple that once the gods had loved. It runs along the top of a great wall, and the floor of the temple lies far down beneath it, of marble, pink and white. Upon the temple floor I counted to the number of 13 hungry cats. Sometimes, they said among themselves, it was the gods that lived here. Sometimes it was men, and now it's cats. So let us enjoy the sun on the hot marble before another people comes. For it was at that hour of a warm afternoon when my fancy is able to hear silences. And the awful leanness of all those 13 cats moved me to go into a neighboring fish shop and there to buy a quantity of fishes. Then I returned and threw them all over the railing at the top of the great wall, and they fell for 30 feet and hit the sacred marble with a smack. Now, in any other town but Rome, or in the minds of any other cats, the sight of fishes falling out of heaven had surely excited wonder. They rose slowly, and all stretched themselves. Then they came leisurely towards the fishes. It is only a miracle, they said in their hearts. And the watchers in the gate said, Enter in. Proudly and slowly, as they spoke, drew up to them a camel, whose rider sought entrance to the city. His face shone with the sunset, by which for long he had steered for the city's gate. Of him they demanded toll, whereat he spoke to his camel, and the camel roared and kneeled, and the man descended from him. And the man unwrapped from many silks a box of diverse metals wrought by the Japanese, and on the lid of it were figures of men who gazed from some shore at an isle of the inland sea. This he showed to the watchers, and when they had seen it, said, It has seemed to me that these speak to each other thus. Behold now Ujni, the dear one of the sea, the little mother sea that hath no storms. She goeth out from Ujni singing a song, and she returneth singing over her sands. Little is Ujni in the lap of the sea, and scarce to be perceived by wondering ships. White sails have never wafted her legends afar. They are told not by bearded wanderers of the sea. Her fireside tales are known not to the north. The dragons of China have not heard of them, nor those that ride on elephants through India. Men tell the tales, and the smoke ariseth upwards. The smoke departeth, and the tales are told. Ujni is not a name among the nations. She is not known of where the merchants meet. She is not spoken of by alien lips. Indeed, but Ujni is a little among the isles, yet is she loved by those that know her coasts and her inland places hidden from the sea. Without glory, without fame, and without wealth, Ujni is greatly loved by a little people, and by a few. Yet not by few, for all her dead still love her, and oft by night come whispering through her woods. Who could forget Ujni, even among the dead? For here in Ujni, wot you, are homes of men, and gardens, and golden temples of the gods, and sacred places inshore from the sea, and many murmurous woods. And there is a path that winds over the hills to go into mysterious holy lands, where dance by night the spirits of the woods, or sing unseen in the sunlight. And no one goes into these holy lands, for who that love Ujni could rob her of her mysteries, and the curious aliens come not. Indeed, but we love Ujni, though she is so little. She is the little mother of our race, and the kindly nurse of all seafaring birds. And behold, even now crossing her, the gentle fingers of the mother sea, whose dreams are far with that old wanderer ocean. And yet let us forget not Fusiyama, for he stands manifest over clouds and sea, misty below, and vague and indistinct, but clear above for all the isles to watch. The ships make all their journeys in his sight, the nights and the days go by him like a wind, the summers and winters under him flicker and fade. The lives of men pass quietly here and hence, and Fusiyama watches there, and knows. And the watchers in the gate said, "Enter in." And I, too, would have told them a tale, very wonderful and very true, one that I had told in many cities, which as yet had no believers. But now the sun had set, and the brief twilight gone, and ghostly silences were rising from far and darkening hills. A stillness hung over that city's gate, and the great silence of the solemn night was more acceptable to the watchers in the gate than any sound of man. Therefore they beckoned to us, and motioned with their hands that we should pass untaxed into the city. And softly we went up over the sand, and between the high rock pillars of the gate, and a deep stillness settled among the watchers, and the stars over them twinkled undisturbed. For how short a while man speaks, and withal how vainly, and for how long he is silent. Only the other day I met a king in Thebes, who had been silent already for 4,000 years. Yeah. Fun stuff. Yeah, but that's it. That is all for today. No more. Okay. We'll get back with The Monster Men by Edgar Rice Burroughs tomorrow. Yeah. Rose says, thank you, Mr. C, and you all. And you all. You made it a great Monday. Well, thank you, Rose. It's been wonderful having you here, and I'm glad you enjoy it. You are very welcome, Melissa. Very welcome. I have a great time doing it, and it's great to have friends here. All righty. If there is anyone new here, yeah, we do this Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Throw down a follow for the channel here if you don't already. One of those. I'm trying to bump up my numbers here on Twitch. Yeah.